Today, the European Union revealed the real plans of Russia and the United States in the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. In Europe, they don't believe that the Kremlin is seriously negotiating about ending the war. They're just stalling for time, hoping to reach an agreement with Donald Trump's administration to resume economic ties with the United States. But they haven't changed their goals to subjugate Ukraine, undermine NATO's position, and reshape the European security architecture in their favor. That's why European intelligence has updated its forecasts and stated that Russia is ready to launch a limited attack on Europe within the next year. That's exactly why Europe is demanding that the peace plan for Ukraine include the issue of limiting the size of the Russian army. Well, while some are just talking, Germany has gone on the offensive against Russia. For now, though, it's only in cyberspace. German authorities are responding for the first time in European history. A reform in the field of intelligence and cybersecurity allows German special services not just to defend themselves, but to carry out their own offensive cyber operations against Russia. At the same time, sources say that the Kremlin is afraid that in 2 to 3 years, Europe will truly become self-sufficient and able to defend itself without American help. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in and of course announcements of episodes here on YouTube. So, as Bloomberg writes today, in Eastern Europe they don't believe that the Kremlin is seriously negotiating about ending the war. It's just stalling for time, hoping to make a deal with Donald Trump about resuming economic relations. But it's not changing its goals regarding conquering Ukraine, altering NATO, and reshaping the security architecture in Europe to its own advantage. And here I'll quote a great statement from the Polish president's aide, Marcin Przydacz. Russia is playing games at the negotiating table, but its goal remains unchanged, to subjugate Ukraine and prepare to attack other European countries. Russia is absolutely not ready to negotiate in the spirit of goodwill. The perpetual engine, the driving force of this country for 600 years, has been to keep expanding its territories without paying attention to the problems of its people. At the same time, Estonian intelligence published a report the day before, which stated, and I quote, that Russia is setting long-term operational goals for itself in the war with Ukraine. This confirms that the recent peaceful rhetoric is just a tactic aimed at buying time. The Russian authorities are only pretending to be guilty for this. The Kremlin's strategic goal has not changed: to undermine the positions of the United States and NATO and to reshape the architecture of European security according to its own vision. However, the Kremlin intends to use the Trump administration to restore bilateral relations and to achieve a settlement that would officially cement Ukraine's defeat. The Kremlin has instructed government agencies to demonstrate openness to cooperation with the United States in order to restore ties with Washington. This will open up the possibility of resuming direct flights and issuing visas for the business elite, making it easier to conduct espionage, influence operations, and acquire sanctioned goods. One of the cooperation options being considered in Moscow is the creation of a post-war reconstruction fund financed by Russian assets frozen in the West. This will allow Moscow to effectively impose its will on Ukraine and fund propaganda campaigns. And at the same time, Russia claims that it is very concerned about rearmament in Europe. European intelligence reports that the Kremlin is genuinely afraid that in 2 to 3 years European forces will be able to act against Russia independently without the support of American forces. Therefore, at the moment, Russia's goal is to delay this process and hinder it. But Russia itself is not stopping. It is actively preparing for armed confrontation. In particular, as European intelligence states, ammunition production is growing so rapidly that Russia will be able to stockpile for future wars while continuing to conduct military operations against Ukraine. That is why Europe has started to seriously prepare for a major war. According to recent forecasts by European intelligence and military officials, Russia will be ready to attack NATO by 2029. But recently these assessments have changed significantly. It now seems increasingly likely that a military operation could take place much earlier, before Europe is ready to mount a full response. And here I'll quote the Dutch Minister of Defense, Ruben Brekelmans. In our assessment, Russia will be able to move forces to NATO's borders within 1 year. We see that they are already increasing their strategic reserves, building up their presence and weaponry along NATO's borders. Even without a peace agreement on Ukraine, Russia can instantly free up to 200,000 soldiers simply by switching from offensive operations to holding positions on the Ukrainian front. In Europe, they believe that Russia is simultaneously trying to improve relations with the United States and drive a wedge between Europe and America. But the Kremlin also understands that in 2 to 3 years, Europe will stop being dependent on America for defense, and that's why Putin might hurry to start an attack on Europe. And here I want to tell you about an interesting experiment. The German media company Welt organized so-called war games in Berlin in December, involving politicians, officials, and military personnel from Germany and NATO. And the scenario of these war games involved a Russian invasion of Lithuania on October 27, 2026 under the pretext of a humanitarian crisis. In the Kaliningrad region, a group of 15,000 soldiers captured the Lithuanian city of Marijampolė. This is an important transportation hub near the so-called Suwałki corridor, which is about a 100-kilometer stretch of the Lithuanian-Polish border running from Belarus to the Kaliningrad region. And so, during these war games, experts concluded that if Moscow presented its invasion as a humanitarian mission, it would allow United States President Donald Trump to refuse. To follow Article 5 of the NATO Charter on Collective Defense, they could say, this isn't an attack, there's a humanitarian crisis, something had to be done. Also, during the war games, the German authorities showed indecisiveness, and Poland, although it announced mobilization, did not send its troops to Lithuania. As a result, during these games, Russia established dominance in the Baltic countries with just a small force of 15,000 soldiers. That is why there are increasing calls in Europe to blockade the very same Kaliningrad region. Against this backdrop, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, stated that Russia should be required to limit the size of its army as part of an agreement to end the war in Ukraine. Here is her quote. Right now, the negotiations are discussing limiting the Ukrainian army, but let's be honest, the problem is not the Ukrainian army. The problem for Ukraine and European countries has always been the Russian army. The agreement should also include restrictions on Russia's military spending, otherwise peace will not be sustainable. I'd like to remind you that on February 10, Europe began preparing a list of demands for Russia to help settle the war in Ukraine. And Kallas made the following statement about this. Everyone at the negotiating table, including the Russians and Americans, needs to understand that European consent is necessary to make a decision. And for this, we also have conditions, and these conditions should be put forward not to the Ukrainians, who are already under strong pressure, but to the Russians. And I'll finish this episode with an interesting piece of news that surprised me, honestly. Really surprised me in the context of how much Europe has woken up. The German authorities have started reforms in the field of intelligence and cybersecurity, which will allow the country's special services not only to defend themselves, but also to conduct their own offensive cyber operations against Russia. Because it's no secret that Russia is waging a real hybrid war in Europe, where cyber attacks have become one of the main weapons, and Germany is one of the main targets of Russian hackers. And the thing is, until now, Germany and other European countries have refrained from conducting offensive operations, fearing that they could provoke retaliatory measures and an escalation of the conflict, especially from Russia. Remember that rhetoric like we shouldn't escalate because what if the Russians suddenly strike back at us? But now, as it turns out, even France and the Netherlands have included the possibility of offensive operations in their cyber strategies, so you could say Europe has finally woken up. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, hit the notification bell, and don't forget to like if you found this episode useful or interesting. You can support our YouTube channel with your donation or subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. That's it. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.